Assalamu alaikum. I'm Ben Wattenberg in Cairo, Egypt, a country of 60 million people and the leader of the Arab world. It said, as Egypt goes, so goes the Middle East. What's going on here is not what has been going on here. After decades of economic stagnation, Egypt is moving ahead.
10 years ago, the per capita income was around $600. Now it is doubled. It is around $1,200.
A wave of market capitalism and political democracy has been sweeping across the world. Eastern Europe, Latin America, Russia and Asia, despite their problems. Mostly absent from the march toward markets had been the Arab nations of the Middle East. Now, signs of change from the crucial country, Egypt. The topic before the House, the vital middle in the Middle East. This week on Think Tank. President Hosni Mubarak has made Egypt's economic growth a priority. The country now sports a healthy annual growth rate. Earlier this year, Egypt hosted a meeting of 15 developing countries trying to get on board the train to modernism, economic and political. It's not easy going. Egypt, like many developing nations, is emerging from decades as a socialist economic system and has a long way yet to go toward full democracy. Moussa is the foreign minister of Egypt.
In terms of roads, communications, airports, schools, hospitals, electricity, sewage, all that. Underground metro in Cairo and then in Alexandria. All those things have been rebuilt. So the hopes are really growing that we can do it, and we can do it in much shorter period of time than we would have thought.
In earlier times, jobs and the government were tightly and unprofitably linked. Now, modern Egyptians are looking to the private sector as a force for change.
We are talking about market economy, therefore we are talking about private sector. We are talking about individuals and individual contacts, individual joint ventures. And this is what is lacking now because individuals are frustrated. They don't want to enter into this. Once this conciliation or this understanding is achieved, I believe it will play a very important role in rebuilding or in building the regional economic prosperity.
There's an air of optimism among many young people. Egyptians returning from years abroad are quick to notice the difference. Heba al-Shazlet.
Why should we leave? There are new opportunities. We can start businesses. We can actually have a decent living here. And why leave? Why leave our families? Why be far away? Why be strangers in a foreign land and have to struggle and go through all the difficulties when we can stay in Egypt? Life is not perfect. There are still lots of problems. However, we can make a go out of it. We can start a new business. We can make money.
Political reforms are also surfacing in a country accustomed to one-party rule and less than total freedom of expression. Salama is a columnist for the Egyptian newspaper Al Aram.
The economic reforms are taking the lead. The political reforms are still back behind. We do hope that if the economic reform succeeds in getting its goals, this will, in a way, encourage the political system to take much more courageous steps in liberating the political system, in putting it into the same step with the economic system also. We think that this will come.
With the globalization of the economy, computers, satellites, and television are changing life in Egypt. bringing in information from all over the world.
Yeah, of course. I would say that the impact of the globalization of news, which, as they said, made the world a small village, is very strong in Egypt. As you may notice that actually the dishes are all over the houses here. The people are getting their news from not only from dishes but also from broadcasting systems and so on, world broadcast systems, which everybody is hearing.
As in many less developed countries, freedom of the press and exposure to foreign cultures may be seen as a mixed blessing. Mohamed is the host of On the Air, the most popular Arab language television program.
The worst thing the Arab world imports is the information. How does this really happen? You have, let's say, an event which happens in the Arab world, which is something like a visit or negotiations between Arafat and Netanyahu. We don't get the information from the Arab side. We get it from the Americans. It happens in the Middle East. It's manufactured in Atlanta, in the United States, and then it is exported to us. This is the most dangerous thing. Openness, no borders, a world without. It's the right of the human being to get his information or his culture from anywhere he wants. But at the same time, you should have your local news, you have your local information, your local culture.
Egyptians hope that their close cultural ties to surrounding Arab countries will set an example.
What is lacking is to establish the community of interests. And this is what should be done. It is not enough to say we are one Arab nation, as has been said 30 years ago. You were referring to that earlier. But to say we have joint interests, we have interests together. We can do it together. We can develop into the future together. We can do that under conditions of peace. It's not necessarily that Arab nationalism means confrontation with everybody else. No, not necessarily that. But Arab solidarity, Arab common life could be a positive factor in building a new Middle East. And a new Middle East with conciliation with others living in the same region, provided, as I said, that Arabs feel that justice has really prevailed.
It all sounds like progress in a very volatile part of the world. But how much? Is it real? Are the lessons of Egypt a model for the rest of the Arab world? To find out, we talk to our expert panel in Cairo. Joining us are Mkaram-Ebeid, a professor of political science at the American University in Cairo, and Mohamed Moneim, the editor-in-chief of the influential magazine Rose El Youssef. Thank you both very much for joining us. It is said that as Egypt goes, so goes the Middle East. That's what we hear. How is Egypt going these days? What's happening?
Well, the saying is right, I believe, because Egypt holds a very central position and heavyweight in the inter-Arab circles. Egypt today is poised to take an important regional role, as you know, but it's a different role. It's a role after the peace process, we hope, which is different than when the negotiations were going on between Egypt and Israel. So there is a different context today with the economic dimension, with need for cooperation in the region.
How is Egypt doing economically now?
Well, I believe it's prospering, it's booming, it's everyone is praising the economic reforms and the privatization experience. Actually, we are now in a position to say that we are about to make our breakthrough.
Do you agree with that?
No, I'm not as optimistic, but I think that a lot has been done in the economic aspect of the liberalization of the economy and the structural adjustment, but it has also caused a lot of problems. So there's the other side.
What sort of problems?
Well, socioeconomic strains for the people who have been most affected. And usually it's the vulnerable sectors of the society, like women, like children, like the lower middle class, the middle class itself.
In other words, the economic boom starts on the top.
It's starting on the top, yeah, I would say.
Well, I don't see it this way.
Good.
I don't see it this way at all.
Well,
I think everybody is.
You think the man on the street is better off now?
I think everyone is profiting. Everyone is profiting. And when I say that, I usually go back to the 70s and 60s. I remember these days very well. And I'll take what late President Sadat said in 1973. He said that the treasury, the budget, the whole money in this country is zero. We started actually from the scratch. And I believe also that we sent someone to get some $250,000 in order, because we needed very vital spare parts for our armed forces. We sent someone to borrow it from an Arab country. But actually now, if you go in any street, you'll find more than that money everywhere. So the thing is that the Egyptians, like Mona, and Mona is a typically Egyptian one, they have high hopes. When they compare themselves, they go and compare themselves with the Americans, for instance. But for us, for our experience, for what we have been through, I believe that what we gained is a miracle.
Is a miracle.
Yes, I think so.
It's said that that there is a lot of progress, but that the Egyptian bureaucracy is so deep and so strong that it's very hard to make progress. Is that?
Very entrenched. It's the biggest bureaucracy in the world and the oldest one.
Uh-huh.
And so this is very heavy to move. Egypt is a very old country, and a lot of the traditions and the habits are very much entrenched.
For example,
So-
what is it that holds back?
The enormous public sector that was established in the 60s has caused a lot of paralysis in many of the institutions. And the mentality is still not geared towards privatization, towards a capitalist model, towards a liberal system, and so on. So it takes time, it's gradual, it's moving, but it's not, we're still in the process.
So the thing is that I find what is more difficult, more hard, is that this pendulum changes that Egypt has to go through. Starting from the mid-50s, we had to go to the Soviet Union, the ex-Soviet Union, and we're actually a satellite, almost a satellite state to the Soviet bloc and the things. But in the late 60s and the early 70s, we changed course and went to the West.
Does economic reform of this sort inevitably lead to democratic political reform?
Not necessarily, because in this case, the economic reform has gone much faster than the political or social reform. And in fact, this is what we are demanding, that it's a three-legged process. One of them is going a bit faster than the two others.
The economic.
Yeah. So the political reform that is in demand today is reviving the political system, meaning that the political parties could have more life, more vivacity, a reform of the main party. We see, in the future, the democratic process is that if the NDP, which is the National Democratic Party, the main party, could evolve into a single-party system democracy. Something very similar to Mexico, for instance, or to Japan. this will reinforce, I believe, the democratic system and the stability of the process. On the other hand, socially also, there are a lot of restrictions today to the vigor of the civil society. Civil society today is trying to break through. NGOs, non-governmental associations,
But for example,
trade
when you
unions.
say the civil society, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about non-governmental
Yeah,
organizations.
no, I know, but for
Yes.
example.
Like associations, trade unions, and many organizations that deal with the issues that the government today is unable to cope with because it is retracting from the so-called welfare system that existed in the socialist phase. So today with privatization, there is a greater need for the civil society to be more active, to be more present, to complement the efforts of the government in education, in health, in women's rights, in civil rights, in
Now
raising the awareness of the political system and so on.
You said, I think we have to reinvigorate or reinforce the democracy. Is Egypt a democracy today? I mean, doesn't President Mubarak, whatever he wants, he pretty well gets?
No, I think it's a real democracy for the first time in its 3 years. President Mubarak is a staunch supporter for democracy, and he applauded and he was so patient, despite the fact that democracy has been exploited by some flanks to penetrate and impose whatever theories. The latest of those were the fundamentalists, and as Mona was saying, the NGOs, trade unions and syndicates and all the things, the fundamentalists tried to penetrate this in order to control the political arena. This, of course, hampered a little and obstructed the experience, but I would say that democracy now, during Mubarak's time, was not preceded in the history of this country.
Well, but you are the editor of a magazine, right?
Yes.
Now, if you want to write in your magazine that President Mubarak is doing a bad job,
Yes.
He's not a good president,
Yes.
we should have another president.
Yes.
Can you do that?
I can do that simply because I adore the man and I admire him so much. But someone else would.
Are there newspapers and magazines that write that in
They
Egypt?
went even far beyond anything, but no one actually says so because they are fully convinced that he's a very good man.
Well,
but they attack his aides, his ministers, his prime minister. They attacked almost everybody.
So what you're visualizing in a one-party state, in a one-party democracy, is that Mubarak or someone who succeeds Mubarak would still be
Strong presidential powers.
very strong.
Yes,
very
because
strong.
we have a presidential system here. And that's why I'm saying I'm giving the comparison between Japan and Mexico because they're much closer to us as far as system goes. Now, as far as the freedom of the press that you're talking about, the opposition papers are quite free to criticize, I must say. There is a limit, of course, they don't usually criticize the president because it's a consensus among them. But they criticize the system, they criticize many of the laws that are coming out, the issues, the economic issues, social issues, and particularly the slowness of the political reform. So, and you have many editorials even in government-sponsored papers that are sometimes more critical even than the opposition papers. So I would say that relatively there is a much greater freedom of the press, there's much greater freedom of the judicial system also. The judicial system is much stronger than it was before. But there is, a limitation to all this. There is pluralism, but with a limited opposition, I would say.
What role does America play in this whole equation that's
Well,
going on?
of course, there is an Americanization of a lot of things now, and CNN is the most powerful media, I guess, today.
You get CNN here, what, on the cable or on the
on the cable, but
cable.
most of the people have it, and there is a CNN syndrome, obviously, and McDonald's and Kentucky's, and there is a lot of mimicry and a kind of a sort of a love-hate relationship. There's a lot of admiration, but there's a lot of criticism on the other hand. I would say that if we talk about the relationship with Egypt, that it's quite a unique relationship because it has withstood for 15 or 17 years after the peace process. Now it's a different stage because the US should stop looking at Egypt just as a strategic asset or just as Israel's peace partner. There is much more.
Some years ago, what, 30 years ago, I guess, when Nasser was still in power, there was talk of the Maghreb, the great Arab nation.
Yes.
Since then, you don't hear, and it was a time when Arab influence was much greater than it is now. It had a superpower arms supplier in the Soviet Union. The oil wealth was great in the Arab countries. Now, since then, that power and influence to the untrained eye has gone downhill. Oil is very cheap. You don't hear much talk about a greater Arab nation with Egypt as the head. Is that accurate? Tell me, am I wrong, or is that accurate?
Well, to a certain extent, it is accurate, yeah. I'm afraid to say so. But, well, the 1967 defeat caused a great frustration and actually shattered off this dream of having a united Arab nation. It will take time, but actually there's something wrong with the Arab mentality. We started the idea of Arab unity and Arab nationality before the Europeans, decades before the Europeans. Now the Europeans have the euro and they are doing very well, but we are not. We are more separate states than we used to be before. I don't know why. It has something to do with...
Is that still your dream for a united Arab nation? Is that your dream, your vision?
Well, of course, the region would gain much more, particularly that we're going into an era of blocks. It's no more countries on their own that stand, even if they're the richest countries or the most populated countries. And here we have two examples, like Saudi Arabia being the richest, or the Emirates, and Egypt being the most populated. If they don't complement each other, if there is no complementarity in the region, then it won't stand to have this importance that you're talking about. And in fact, it's the last region that has not established this kind of consensus or bloc or union. It is happening everywhere. It's happening in Latin America, it is happening with North America, Canada and Mexico. With the ASEAN countries, I don't see why it shouldn't happen here.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for Think Tank. I'm Ben Wattenberg.
We at Think Tank depend on your views to make our show better. Please send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1150 17th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036, or email us at thinktank@pbs.org. To learn more about Think Tank, visit PBS online at www.pbs.org. And please let us know where you watch Think Tank.
This has been a production of BJW Incorporated in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.